Thank you, everyone, very much for joining us today for this talk. We're quite excited to present our speaker. But before I forget, I want to thank those that are joining us on Facebook Live. Of course, it's a new era when it comes to presentations, and we're really thankful that we have lots of different options these days to bring as many people as possible into the conversation. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about who Dr. Harris is, what his bio is, and then also his relationship to the Center for Inclusive Democracy. So Dr. Harris's experience spans 16 years of increasingly responsible leadership and program management experience in general administration, voter registration, elections administration, operations management, and legislative support functions. Most notably, Dr. Harris has held managerial and advanced leadership roles, elections in state, county, Los Angeles County, Fulton County, Gwinnett County, and municipal Long Beach governments. Dr. Harris manages close relationships with state leadership, state election board, and community stakeholders to promote integrity in elections and improved processes in voter registration. He oversaw Gwinnett, and it is Gwinnett, right? Gwinnett County's expanded mail-in ballot operation during the 2020 election cycle amidst a pandemic, personal threats, and intense, of course, scrutiny, as we all know, in that election. Dr. Harris showed great strength and resilience in his performance as Assistant Elections Chief Director and Chief County Registrar of Voters, with demonstrable project management in his administrative responsibilities over voter registration, absentee mail-in voting, advanced early voting, provisional voting, and complex voter data research and analysis. Dr. Harris also supported election programs in Los Angeles County, City of Long Beach between 2005-2018 before beginning his election administration responsibilities in Georgia. Dr. Harris earned a Doctor of Public Administration and Masters of Public Administration, and is currently attending Emory School of Law in Atlanta, Georgia. His research interests are voter turnout, public participation, public perception on voting, and decision making. And just a little bit about the Center for Inclusive Democracy and our relationship. So we at the Center for Inclusive Democracy, of course, our work is very public, and we work with election officials, advocacy groups, community leaders, public policy decision makers in California and across the country. And in that work, we are very fortunate to have a really strong group of election administrators, leadership in the election administration field, that I think value our work, but have been really great collaborators, advisors, in some form, formally or informally, with the work that we do across the country. And Dr. Harris in particular, particularly so, has been just great to work with, of course, but also is a member formally of our National Advisory Committee for our voting location citing tool. And so we greatly appreciate that formal partnership and just his willingness to be so open to research that would hopefully hold as an academic, but it's not always guaranteed as an election administrator, and also just being so open to who we are as a center and helping to encourage the use of our data tools and other work as well. So, all that said, I want to welcome Dr. Harris. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Center for Inclusive Democracy and the Price School of Public Policy here in Los Angeles.
Thank you so much, Dr. Romero, for the invitation, and also to the Center for Inclusive Democracy and its many California-based partners and affiliates that fight for our democracy, to definitely the USC Price School leadership, everyone that's in attendance today who's joining us live on Facebook, and to my parents who is joining me today. And a little background story about my parents and my mom. She has worked in Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder since '95 and has been active in the elections even before then, serving as a poll official, poll worker, poll manager. I remember during the time when LA County had garages as polling locations and precincts, right? And how you'll gather all of the election equipment a couple of days prior to the election, and it'll be in our living room, and big heavy boxes to carry and roster of voters, and never knew that while I was 16, 17, assisting her in those efforts, that I would end up in elections. And so when I graduated high school, she was the one that encouraged me to apply for a student professional worker role, and then I ended up accepting an election deputy role, a deputy registrar in LA County, and served there for quite some time, learning candidate filing, election certification and audits, and just sort of building that foundation. And it has matriculated to serving in the city of Long Beach, overseeing absentee ballot there and the whole candidate filing for nominating municipal elections. And then I ended up going to Georgia, where life changed, right? 2020, we would have never considered or thought that a global pandemic would impact us the way it did. And just like all unsung and sung heroes, election officials are amongst those that had to go into the office every day to make sure that people got their ballots and that the Constitution was maintained and upheld. So I am very, very grateful to be here and to share a little bit about what it is that I know and my experience, coupled with my research interests on reimagining elections, more so how to engage and encourage the next generation of election officials. What we find now is that there is limited exposure or no exposure to those that are interested or becoming interested in serving as election officials. It is not the most glamorous role there is, right? Go to school to be a medical doctor or in school for law. Those are the more professions and disciplines that you kind of look forward to. Auburn University in Alabama has a great program for election officials, but I would like to see programs throughout the nation that are preparing those to serve in the capacity in which I serve and many of our ground zero election officials do. So 2020, okay, it offered us a unique opportunity to study new solutions for old problems found in a very decaying and crippling infrastructure, right? Elections has transitioned to a biennial, sort of every other year sort of excitement. And now it has been in news every day, the headlines every day. Global, national, regional, local papers, headlines are elections. And that is basically what we are heading into. So Mindy did go over my background, but this is more so for future purposes when this is recorded and codified into this discussion. And so this is more about me and my background and my progression through the elections ecosystem. So elections and voting 101. It's like I like to start with. What is an election? Of course, it is a formal group, a citizen organization. Corporations use the process. It is a formal decision-making process by which a population chooses an individual or multiple individuals to hold public office for mass and district-specific representation. This process also includes approval or disapproval of measures or propositions, referendums, and constitutional amendments. Elections has been the mechanism for modern representation in democracy since the 17th century. The doctrine of election, I like. I'm also studied theology in undergraduate, so I like to always draw on different disciplines, especially when I'm managing staff. Looking at psychology, sociology, health and wellness, right? So in biblical texts, election is seen or demonstrated through choice, free will, right? The option, either or. So what is voting? So we know that the election is the noun, but voting is the adverb, the action. So that is the formal and definite expression of an opinion or choice made by an individual participating in an election. This is seeking candidates or approving or disapproving measures, and we see that a lot when we have propositions on the ballot, for and against arguments. And this is done on an official ballot. Then that ballot is tabulated to discover the majority of votes cast given for a specific candidate or candidates and measure. It's the formal process for determining the will of the most, or the will of most of the population. It's always the majority, right? There's always a statistical variance that some may like the candidate, some may not like the candidate. What we see common voting choices or options are election day, that is in person on election day, standing in lines. You have advanced voting, vote centers. I know California Los Angeles rather had moved to a vote center sort of voting option just recently. And then you have absentee by mail and then also provisional voting. So this discussion needs to start off with identifying what is or who is an elections official. An elections official is a professional who is responsible for the preparation and legal conduct of elections where eligible voters can exercise their right to vote. Some national profession titles include county clerk, city clerk, elections director or supervisor, supervisor of elections, chief registrar, secretary, secretary of states. Education degree disciplines may or can include public administration, business administration, public policy, political science, sociology, and others. The National Association of Election Officials does offer a professional certificate program called CERA, along with other professional programs that are awarded through, like I said earlier, Auburn University in Alabama. What I like to call us as election officials, we are jack of all trades, right? We are emergency and crises managers, event coordinators, traffic coordinators, logistics specialists, pioneers, recruiters, educators, trainers, communicators. We interpret the law. We manage misinformation. We pivot on a dime. We saw that in 2020, where in Gwinnett, in Georgia, I was responsible for the expansion of our vote by mail, which was before the pandemic in 2018. We had about 30,000 applications for absentee ballots. And in 2020, we went up to over 200,000 applications. And throughout the 2020 election cycle, I may have touched or issued over 500,000 absentee ballots through the course of our election cycle. I also added in there, we're waymakers, miracle workers, we're promise keepers and carriers and defenders of democracy. So it's important to talk about certification. And I think that's what this conversation will focus on. What I wanted to sort of tell was a story that I was just at the National Association of State Election Directors in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, beautiful, beautiful state capital. And one of the activities was a wine and cheese tasting adventure. And we had a cheese specialist there who had said that you have to have all of these certifications and background and experience in order to be a cheesemaker. And I raised my hand and said, so you're telling me, now we're in a room of about 39 states represented at the national conference. And I said, you mean to tell me that it is easier to become an elections official than it is to become a licensed cheesemaker? So in Wisconsin, just to give you some background, the requirements to become a cheesemaker, you have to do a 3-year course of study and also a practical apprenticeship. If you want to be a cheesemaker, you have to possess a cheesemaker license in Wisconsin for at least 10 years. You must be a resident of one of Wisconsin's 72 counties. Complete 240 hours of an apprenticeship under a licensed cheesemaker. Complete 5 university-level short courses, pass a written exam, and pay up to $3,000 for course and license fees. You can get arrested in the state of Wisconsin for making cheese without a license. And I said that to say it is important that we start looking at certification and education programs that support and prepare election officials to be responsive and confident in their work. In the state of Georgia, we have 159 counties, and each county's elections operations is managed by a appointed board of voter registration elections, which can be composed of 3 to 5 people. They then hire a elections official or election superintendent. Many of our counties do not require an advanced degree. They do not require that you're certified outside of the state certification, which is just a 12 course PowerPoint presentation, which you can actually look at, review, and take the exam online and pass it. It does not really test for knowledge gained through what you have read or consumed, and being at the state and responsible for training deliverables and overseeing that operation. Because of high turnover, we see that a lot of people are not prepared to facilitate county level elections. And so the conversation that I want to start and sort of get to the masses is that we work together to build programs and inform institutions to prepare for the next wave of election officials, because elections are not going anywhere. We've been doing them for the past couple of centuries, and it is definitely going to become more advantageous to our democracy. It's definitely going to be heavily scrutinized and under the microscope post 2020. And so it's important that we start these conversations. So some of the actors of elections, you have voters, candidates, legislators, political parties, political action committees, nonpartisan organizations, special interest groups, election officials, information technology, media, election science experts and researchers like Dr. Romero and CID, poll workers and poll officials, poll monitors and poll watchers, public monitors and observers. Those are all different. Some are credentialed, some are not credentialed. Some are vetted, some are not. Law enforcement, lawyers, courts, right? And also deniers, dissenters, and agitators. So a discussion of local elections. Elections is arguably important, right? There's always a need for elections because it shows the will of the people. So Article 1 of the legislative branch pins the election clause doctrine and practice. It regulates time, place, and manner for holding elections. The first comprehensive federal statute was adopted in 1870. Enforcement of the 15 amendments guaranteed against racial discrimination in granting suffrage rights. Under the Enforcement Act of 1870, false registration, bribery, voting without legal right, making false return of votes, interference in any manner were all made federal offenses. Legislation such as HAVA, Help America Vote Act, and then other organizations that fall under the approval of legislation such as VFAP, Federal Voting Assistance, as well as EAC. These organizations allow for nonpartisan program oversight and administration for fair, accurate, and accessible elections. Then you also have state and local governments that can create non-conflicting laws to govern voter registration and state elections. type of elections are federal. We always see that for our president, state, governor, it's popular, and then local would be your mayor and council. So local election administration. When we look at integrity, we look at relevance, we look at challenges, we look at any resolutions. So local elections, for me, are the most important, that's in my opinion, but there's also evidence that proves that as well. I actually studied local elections for my dissertation, which was the 88 cities of our Los Angeles County. When I lived here, our great county and great state, but now I'm in Georgia, so the great state of Georgia. Relevance, local action and response. And what that means is having the forethought and foresight to be responsive to voter needs, looking at how to improve voter experiences. And that comes from preparation to training to actual voting, and then even after voting. So post-election, how do you debrief? How do you sit down and encourage the minds to meet, to look at challenges, look at documentation of what went wrong, look at documented voter complaints, and try to understand how to improve your election processes and deliverables. Challenges, turnout in odd years, right? That, and also keeping individuals engaged. Resolutions to date, we've had the widespread legislation throughout our nation actually has moved to consolidate municipal elections with counties to respond to low voter turnout. And we saw that in California's act for SB 415. And actually Common Cause studied the outcome of that and found that the report of the cities that they researched, their turnout had tripled because they consolidated with the county. Low voter turnout on off-cycle local elections, not conducted with statewide elections, leads to non-representative electorate making policy decisions. And that's actually cited by Minnis and Spencer 2021, and I also cited myself, my dissertation work, Harris 2018. So prior to the switch of the 54 cities of California that was studied by Common Cause, prior to the switch, 25% was the voter turnout. And on average, on cycle, when they consolidated with counties, it tripled and went to 75% or more. It responded to voter fatigue. Also, informing voters. A lot of people don't participate in elections because they're not aware. A lot of people don't know that an election is even happening in their community until a candidate comes walking up the street or they see a campaign sign on the lawn. So it is very important that local election administrators create a robust education outreach program, even partner with government agencies and other organizations through IGAs and MOUs. Also, another thing that we can do to build integrity is managing and maintaining list maintenance, so clean voter rolls, especially doing that well ahead of election and also doing it within the confines of legislation timetables. Voting equipment, making sure that you are always refreshing and looking at the usability of voting equipment. LA County did a great job with the VSAP creation and implementation, and we'll talk more about that later, but how they invited the public to actually sit in on the development of that. They also invited city clerks. When I was with the city of Long Beach, I actually sat in on the focus group. I worked at LA County, and when we had the IncoVote system and the Scantron cards, as I call them, in our MTS room where we just tabulated hundreds of thousands of cards. And I worked there under Connie B. McCormick at the time, and then now Dean Logan. And so I like that counties and local elections officials are always looking to advance the voter experience and the voter based on voter needs, and changing the current infrastructure. Also, voter registration systems. Georgia is currently in the process of finishing the tail end of a newly developed from the ground up voter registration system to respond to a system that has reached its end of life and that has not been able to keep up with the increase of voter data in which we are accumulating. Everyone's moving to Georgia, so voter registrations go up. And then also in that voter education, providing opportunities to register, just like you have fairness and accuracy and accessibility to voting, the same applies to voter registration. So those programs that encourage voter registration, training programs that educate individuals and organizations to conduct voter registration drives, that should be part of this integrity plan as well. And then innovative voting solutions. We're in a highly digitized society, and I don't know what it's going to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We may be voting on our smartphones when I'm my grandmother's age. We don't know. But digitization, ease of access, looking at planning, thinking about supply shortages, vendor management, and also strategic outsourcing and oversight. So connecting people with processes and then to the polls. Because it's one thing to encourage and preach registration, but how do you get them to the polls, right? And so that's where the gap or disconnect is. We are excited. We have made registration easy through DMV partnerships, through organizations. When you apply for food stamps or public assistance, right? At the application to register to vote is a part of that packet. And we give people the option to opt in, to opt out. But election day turnout is low. And why is that? So we have hundreds and thousands, and LA County has millions of registered voters, but then turnout for off-year election is scarce, right? And so how do we do this? Community connection. I love this graphic because it captured everything that I was trying to express. So local program significance, engagement. How do you build engagement? How do you strategically plan for it? I don't have the answers, right? I can tell you what we do at local and state level, but this is just to start the conversation and get the mind going in this way. Education, robust voter education programs. Looking at the reason why. Why do we need a voter education program? What are the limitations? What are the educational gaps? What does the public know and what does the public not know? Messaging, strategic messaging, and using different tools to get that out. So targeted, direct, plain language, messaging that's vetted, confirmed, that's procedural, something that you can explain, that is publicly accessible, available in various languages. Even there's a lot of states and counties that have produce a lot of their educational videos in sign language, because that's a language that we don't really consider when we're looking at translation, right? And so putting that in your mind, looking at the ADA community and limitations in those risks and how to plan for that. Using all media platforms, our postcards with QR codes, that's what we do in Georgia. Direct messaging, we use Ballot Track, a vendor to track ballots, and that includes text messaging, email, and also local governments like mayor and city councils and board of supervisors and county board of commissioners, as we call them in the state of Georgia. They can use their district town hall meetings, invite your city clerk out to provide this education and resource. And then also future research, interest, and elaboration, and involvement, and also ongoing connection. So researchers affirm that community participation is key to collect the information about conditions, needs, assumptions, and attitudes of local communities when individuals are involved and deeper involved in development stages of programs. This is how you build trust and confidence. Participants have a sense of contribution when they are involved. They also have this feeling of ownership. And then also it will, they have the affinity to remain connected and to participate, and then also gather and bring others. So the snowball effect that we use in research methodology. Encourage neighbors and family and friends to participate. So strategic planning and decision-making. Voter education. We look at this from all angles, and local election officials should be committed to developing a voter education program. When I say robust, from conception to the embryonic stage, all the way through its implementation, and then taking that and studying its impact, its reach, and seeing what can be done to improve. There always needs to be this sense of ongoing evaluation and improvement. That also goes for candidates. Some jurisdictions do not handhold their candidates. When I was in Long Beach, we did a lot of handholding, and I appreciated that because forms were accurate. We provided a candidate workshop that gave the critical and vital information in which they needed to be successful to qualify for office. So not to run your campaign, not to give any partisan or nonpartisan feedback or training, but more so how to run for office, how to qualify for office, and what to expect along the way. Public information and access to all your voters and candidates. You want to start looking at that concept as well, and where to post that information, and publishing it in legal organs, publishing it on your website, using other partners and community organizations to do that as well. All in strict regulation of what the legislation allows, right? So messaging and communication management, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be relevant, accurate, and it needs to be targeted. And then public participation. You want your public to participate in logic and accuracy testing. That is the formal process or testing that all election equipment and touch points go through to test the system as accurate and ready to be used in an election. Reviewing the sample ballot, creating a handbook, a voter handbook like the state of California does, and also LA County. And then also looking at, if you're going to do new voting equipment, bringing the public in, like LA County did with partnership with AT&T and the VSAP voting equipment. Also, tabulation and certification. You want the public to be involved in that so that you manage misinformation, you sort of mitigate the stolen election ideology that's out there. Because media runs a gamut with false information. When I was in Gwinnett, I used to always, and I kid with my mother all the time, I'm an elections official. I do not care who wins. I am here to count ballots. And if I have to count all 900,000 by hand, I will. And that's exactly what we did. So the state of Georgia in 2020, through legislation that happened in 2019, required a first audit in the state, that it be piloted, and it was supposed to just be one district race. And because of Georgia's very strong focal point, our Secretary of State had called for a 100% count of votes cast for the presidential election. And so for November, I had over 900 ballots cast in my county, and we counted each and every vote. And so I am proud of that and being a part of Georgia's history in that regard. Also, polling location siting tool, right? Like CID's conception, involving public in that. And also because those data touch points are a part of that tool. And so you want to be able to have their insight and involvement as well. Poll workers, so development of polling place design, your ingress, egress, your flow, they need to be responsible and partly liable for that. Your poll worker manager and your poll worker groups, they are there all day, or if you have vote centers, or 11 days of continuous voting, or in Georgia, we have 19 days of continuous voting with the option to have Sunday voting, and some of our large metro counties do that. You want them to be a part of that voter experience development and also voter experience narratives. So in Gwinnett County, we developed a form that called Voter Concerns and Complaints that voters can document their issue, incident, their concern, or their appreciation in real time. And then we can, after debrief, can sort of collect that information and see what needs to be changed throughout our early voting locations. And then also post-election debrief. So if you have a board meeting like we do in Georgia to certify the election and to talk about election planning, you want to invite the public to that and participate in that and give oral testimony of their experience. And then also any official reports, you want to make sure that that is publicly available and also advertised. Education, registration, voting, repeat. Education, registration, voting, repeat. So looking at the more modernization approach. So robust, targeted, and tested outreach and education programs, identify any gaps, disparities, and problems, looking at voters and how they are engaged, how they are disengaged. And I know that local election officials are busy enough and really can't focus on that. And that's where the intellect, the researchers, the subject matter experts come in to help in this regard. So this conversation is for academia is also for election officials. And to do that partnering that we really don't see as much, especially for counties like LA County that has elections every year. So on odd years, they're conducting elections for all the municipalities, and then they need to prepare for even year elections. So this year we're doing our midterm. 2023, they're going to do the 88 cities that consolidate, if they consolidate with them, speaking LA County specifically, and then turn around once you certify that election in November, you're preparing for qualifying for the presidential preference primary. So there's really no time for a local election official to dedicate to being an owner of this, but if they can be a coordinator and a information support or informant, and we get that mindset going, I think that this relationship can become something worthwhile. I think or believe, in using myself included, those of us that are election officials, we get overwhelmed when we are invited or introduced to participating or being an owner of rethinking or reimagining elections. And we get excited to participate, but then a special called election happens, or somebody's recalled, or we have a petition and we have to validate and verify hundreds and thousands of signatures. So the partnership with universities, educational institutions, organizations, research like the Pew Foundation, very important that we start having that discussion to sort of merge those endeavors. Also, looking at strategic practices for poll officials, uniform messaging, training well in advance of the election, and also recruitment. It's very challenging to recruit poll officials. We see that throughout the nation, and especially since the pandemic, very, very challenging. And without poll officials, elections can't happen. We need poll officials. So it's always important to always have ongoing recruitment efforts and then training, and also uniform conversation and messaging. If you have 159 polling locations, all of the information that's disseminated to voters should be uniformed and the same. and very nonpartisan along that spectrum. And then also the general public, what programs you have for them. And then evaluation of efficiency and effectiveness. So the research design piggybacking. There's a lot of research that's out there that can help with this understanding and foundation. And it just doesn't have to be election specific. You can use other election-based evidence, or not election-based evidence, but research-based evidence that supports public participation, like I used earlier in the presentation, that would, information that sort of changes how a certain group thinks or how they interact. You can always use research and analysis that sort of informs best practices and then move you forward to improving what it is that you currently do. Documentation is key. So document issues, document challenges, and then also rationales and justifications for why you did what you did. Document it in real time, because it's a whirlwind, and once you certify the election and start preparing for the next one, you've forgotten what happened in the previous months in election to help you improve. And so that's why we see this continuous cycle of the same old that we like to say, because we don't have the bandwidth, the time, the leadership, or the forethought to even progress along those lines. And so that's why it's important to have partnerships with organizations and universities to advance the voter experience and also local election administration. So voting sensitivities. A conversation that I want to start is DEI, synchronization, and inclusion, looking at cultural diversity, awareness, and sensitivity. We have definitely realized that through ADA Act, DOJ, and its oversight of making sure that polling locations are accessible for those with disabilities. We have the HAVA Act that helps fund many things in polling location infrastructure and change and making sure that it's accessible. So now it's time for local election administrators to start thinking about DEI when it comes to voters. So that's looking at voting wait times. It's looking at polling locations, staffing, and voting options campaign. When we look at long lines, the study of long lines on election day specifically became something real popular, more so in 2006. And the study looked at that there were longer wait times in more impoverished, low-income, non-white areas as opposed to other areas. And maybe not by design at all or nobody's fault, but it's goes again to staffing. State legislation requires a certain amount of polling locations for a district or precinct. If you can't staff them, what can you do? So partnering with churches and other locations within the precinct to have staffing in those areas of the people that live there, right, should be a forethought or should be the foundation of that practice. I know when I was still living here, we had a press release that from LA County that listed a lot of, I think the headline was a lot of challenging or hard to staff polling locations. And it wasn't just in South Central. I mean, Beverly Hills was on there, So that can be a disadvantage because don't want to close any polling locations. You want to keep them open. But you also want to make sure that you look at voting wait times. And so there was a study conducted that looked at long lines on election day. And that's from Pettigrew Stephen, who looked at racial gap in wait times and why minority precincts are underserved by local election officials. And in all of that comes with the staffing and just people not interested in communities that are not civically engaged. If they're not civically engaged, if they don't really participate in elections, $125 for the day is not going to move them, unfortunately. So we have to look at funding. We have to look at legislation and inform legislators on what it is that the challenges that we have at the ground level, at the local level, so that they can start supporting from the top. And just a little bit of statistics. For the 2016 US presidential election, researchers used data from hundreds of thousands of smartphone users and quantified a racial disparity in voting wait times across the nation. Relative to entirely white neighborhoods, residents in entirely black neighborhoods waited nearly 30% longer to vote and were almost 75% more likely to spend more than 30 minutes in line at their polling location. And like I said, it's not an argument against racism and disparity. It's the root of the problem. It's the limited education and the lack of information to these communities, and also people's willingness to have their location be a polling site, and also people's willingness to staff those locations and actually be involved and engaged in it. So with DEI, you want to map and you want to trace demographic population data, something that CID and the polling location siting tool does well. It acknowledges many factors there. So it looks at race, ethnicity, gender, location, how many locations are already there, where these need to be, and it overlays and has all these different functions and uses very high-tech GIS capabilities. And so I'm an advocate of that tool and grateful that it was introduced to our counties. You want to use that data to plan for vote center expansion, something that LA County did very well. And also, I believe, if I read an article correctly, that they had 24-hour voting in 2020, which I need to confirm. But it was a vote center, and it was like you could vote 24 hours. And I think it was like 1 or 2 days. I don't know. But definitely need to look that over. I thought that was interesting. If not 24 hours, it was over 12 hours. It was a very long period of time, which I thought was great. Also, you want to use that data to see if you need to split precincts. Our legislators in Georgia had codified law that required, if our precinct is more than 2,000 registered voters, to address long wait times, that we need to split precincts and create additional polling locations. And so that's when siting tools become more and more friendly for our use. Also on the personal level, local election administrators should devote time for personal reflection to recognize community needs. I know it's hard to get out there into the community, and that's why you rely on research and those experts to give you that data. Also be a power broker. Have these conversations and hold representatives responsible. Also empower local communities through sensitive action who are seeking to eliminate disparities in social and economic well-being. Like I said, advertising CID, they do that quite well. And that is sort of my introduction to cultural awareness and sensitivity, and folding DEI, which we see has just taken off in the past couple of years. Diversity, inclusion, and equity inclusion in voting, and also looking at it through a voter experience or voter perspective lens. So moving democracy forward. So now we're going to jump into the conversation. So we talked about election officials and who they are. We talked about stakeholders and actors. We talked about program design and involving partnerships and researchers. So now how do we just move democracy forward? So the next couple of slides and minutes is going to talk about the next wave of election officials, specifically succession planning, which some leaders do well and some do not, right? So we have a little graphic with our people, our voters, our candidate, the ballot, and then certifying the election. So best practices for succession planning for the next wave of election officials, and also enhanced voting. Be intentional with your investment in your workforce. Strategic organization plan, specific classification and compensation plan, a work-life balance. A lot of election officials, we at times work more than the ER doctor on any given early voting or election night. There were times where I worked up to 18 hours, and then there was a time when I worked 36 hours straight and never went home, right? And that's just not me. That is election officials across our great nation. And why is that? I know we kid a lot, but the same people that want instant election results on election night are the same people that want all the ballots counted by hand. So there's a disconnect there, and we need to involve our legislators and the powers that be to inform their election law crafting. And then also looking at mid-year to annual market adjustments, recruitment, training, and retention, propose aggressive budgets to apply and also apply for federal grants as permitted by your governing agency. Work with public affairs in your counties and municipalities and other internal and external partners to promote election careers. Amplify the vital role of election officials in comparison to other popular careers, like I had stated at our introduction. Incentivize, award, reward, recognize quality performers, create hierarchical and tiered-based positions. So I know one of the advantages of that would be an election. LA County does it well, a lot of other counties do it well, but election worker 1, 2, 3, so that there can be some career growth and advancement and something for that employee to look forward to based on good performance. Train and cross-train. Everyone in the office should know how to do everything, especially now being in office in 2020 and coming off of that. Create diverse cultures, collectively create shared vision and mission statements and reinforce those goals. So every time you have a meeting, when I have a meeting at the state, our mission and vision is the second PowerPoint. Every time we do a training, it's always stated. It's just not something that we crafted once and put on the wall and we don't see again. We always want to reinforce the mission and vision. And then also leadership development, apprenticeships, internships. We see it in all other organizations, you know. We see adjunct and associate. We see teacher's aide. So you want to create those opportunities where people feel that they can become an elections director one day. And last but not least, and this is not something that we're going to answer right, but this is to start the conversation. What can we do? What other conversations, considerations, stakeholders that we can identify to develop and advance our mission and our reach to continue this conversation, to improve our processes, and to do better in our voter experience modification plan? So what can parents do? Even at the elementary school age, what can parents do? Parents, like my mother, can be a poll worker and bring their children along. Parents can take their child to vote on election day so that they can start having these experiences and these core memories so that they can one day look at election officials as a popular, lucrative, and rewarding career. What can teachers do? What can community leaders do, such as pastors and nonprofit directors? What can education institutions do? What can voting and candidate mobilization organizations do? What can nonprofit agencies do? What can our governments in government do? And what can election and voting researchers do? And there is more questions that can be added to this, but this is definitely to start. Thank you. Thank you so much.